The massive crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with an electric tension. Holographic displays flickered around the circular meeting room, casting strange shadows on the faces of assembled alien delegates. Tall, imposing figures from a dozen different starfaring civilizations sat in tiered seating, their exotic forms a stark contrast to the small human delegation standing at the center. Admiral Jack Williams stood perfectly still, his weathered face betraying no emotion. Behind him, a holographic representation of the human fleet slowly rotated, a collection of ships that looked almost comically small compared to the massive vessels of other galactic powers. The Krell representatives, towering reptilian creatures with 4 arms and skin like polished granite, exchanged knowing glances and barely concealed smirks. The Confederation calls the human representative to present their proposal, announced the council moderator, a translucent being composed of swirling energy particles. Williams stepped forward, his navy blue uniform crisp and immaculate. He carried no additional technology, no elaborate presentation device, just a simple data pad and an unwavering gaze that seemed to cut through the room's ambient mockery. Distinguished members of the Galactic Confederation, he began, his voice calm and measured, we propose a defensive strategy against the Dominion threat. A ripple of barely contained laughter swept through the chamber. The Vorten delegates, crystalline entities that refracted light in mesmerizing patterns, clicked and chittered among themselves. Their representative, a towering structure of interconnected crystal shards, spoke first. A defensive strategy. From a species that has barely stepped beyond its home system. The translation matrix carried a tone of pure condescension. Your entire fleet looks like it could be contained within a single Vorten cargo transport. Williams didn't flinch. The holographic display behind him continued to rotate, showing a fleet of sleek, compact vessels that looked almost fragile compared to the massive warships of other civilizations. Each human ship was roughly the size of a medium cargo vessel from other races, compact, seemingly under-equipped, and laughably small. The Luminar delegation, beings of pure energy contained within intricate electromagnetic suits, projected their collective amusement. Waves of dismissive energy rippled through the chamber, a psychic representation of their collective derision. 12 standard vessels, muttered a Krell elder, his gravelly voice dripping with contempt. 12. The Dominion destroys entire planetary systems with less effort than it takes to breathe. Williams remained silent, allowing the mockery to wash over him. His team, a diverse group of human military and diplomatic experts, stood equally composed. They seemed almost unnaturally calm in the face of such open ridicule. The council moderator, sensing the growing tension, attempted to restore some semblance of diplomatic decorum. The human representative will explain the strategic value of their proposed fleet. Another round of barely suppressed chuckles erupted from the alien delegates. It was clear they expected nothing more than a comedy of errors. Admiral Williams activated his datapad. Precise schematics of the human vessels began to replace the rotating hologram. Unlike the ornate and complex designs of other galactic powers, these ships looked almost minimalist. Clean lines, compact configurations. Nothing about them screamed technological superiority. Our fleet represents a new approach to interstellar conflict, Williams said simply. No grand gestures, no passionate speech, just a statement of fact. The Vorten representative leaned forward, crystal formations shifting in what could only be described as amused curiosity. And what approach would that be, human? For the first time since entering the chamber, a hint of a smile crossed Williams' face. It was not a smile of triumph or arrogance. It was the calm, knowing smile of someone who understood something that others did not yet comprehend. Adaptability, he said quietly. The chamber fell silent, not from respect, but from the sheer audacity of the statement. 12 ships. Adaptability. Against the might of the Dominion. It was absurd. It was laughable. Or was it? 3 standard galactic weeks after the Galactic Council meeting, the intelligence reports began to flood in. The Dominion was on the move, And this time, their assault was more ruthless than ever before. In the central command center of the Galactic Confederation, holographic displays flickered with a terrifying rhythm. Star systems marked in deep crimson represented fallen colonies, worlds reduced to little more than cosmic dust. The Dominion's massive dreadnoughts moved like predatory sharks through the peaceful regions of space, consuming everything in their path. Admiral Williams stood silently in the observation deck, his hands clasped behind his back. The other military leaders from various alien civilizations moved nervously around him, their communication channels alive with panic and uncertainty. "We cannot mobilize fast enough," muttered a Krell general, his four arms moving in agitated patterns. "The Dominion's advance is too quick. They're consuming entire star systems before we can even coordinate a response." The Vorten strategic analyst, a complex crystalline being that seemed to shimmer with internal light, projected a series of tactical maps. Each projection showed the same devastating pattern: the Dominion's ships moving with calculated precision, destroying defensive positions and overwhelming planetary shields as if they were nothing more than tissue paper. "Our conventional defense strategies are useless," the Vorten analyst said, crystal formations shifting to represent frustration. "We've spent centuries building these massive fleets, and yet we're watching them become obsolete in a matter of weeks." Williams remained quiet. His team of human specialists worked silently at their stations, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. Unlike the other delegations, they showed no signs of panic. Their movements were deliberate, calculated. A young human tactical analyst named Mark Roberts approached Williams, holding a data tablet. "Sir, we've completed our preliminary analysis of the Dominion's recent attack patterns." The room fell silent. The other alien military leaders turned, a mixture of curiosity and lingering condescension in their expressions. Roberts began to explain. His presentation was unlike the typical grandiose military briefings. No dramatic gestures, no complex technical jargon, just clear, precise information. He highlighted the Dominion's attack vectors, their ship movement algorithms, and the predictive patterns of their assault strategies. "They operate on a centralized command structure," Roberts explained. "Each attack is coordinated through a primary control ship. Remove that ship, and the entire assault formation becomes chaotic." The Luminar military strategist, a being of pure energy contained within an electromagnetic suit, leaned forward. "And how do you propose to identify and neutralize this control ship? Our most advanced scanning technologies have failed to penetrate their defensive screens." A hint of a smile crossed Roberts' face. "We don't need to scan. We need to understand." Williams stepped forward, taking control of the presentation. The holographic display changed, showing a series of complex mathematical models and behavioral prediction algorithms. To the alien representatives, it looked like nothing more than abstract art. But there was a pattern, subtle, almost invisible, but definitely present. "The Dominion believes in total control," Williams said. "Their entire military philosophy is built on the concept of absolute command. But absolute control is also their greatest weakness." The room was so quiet that one could hear the subtle hum of the holographic systems. "We're not going to fight their war," Williams continued. "We're going to break their understanding of warfare." The alien military leaders exchanged confused glances. Some looked intrigued. Others still seemed skeptical. The 12 small human ships remained a point of ridicule. How could such a tiny fleet make any difference against the massive Dominion war machine? But something was different this time. The humans weren't presenting a traditional battle plan. They were offering something else entirely, a complete reimagining of conflict itself. As the meeting continued, the holographic displays continued to show the Dominion's relentless advance. Entire star systems marked in crimson, billions of lives potentially at stake. And in the middle of this impending galactic catastrophe, 12 small human ships represented humanity's only hope. The first real test came at the outer colonial rim of the Orion sector. Dominion warships, Massive metallic behemoths that dwarfed entire space stations descended upon the defenseless colony of New Hope. Sensor readings showed over 50 primary assault vessels, supported by hundreds of smaller attack craft. Admiral Williams sat in the compact bridge of the lead human vessel, the HMS Defiance. Around him, a crew of 12 worked with an almost supernatural synchronization. Unlike the massive command centers of other species, the human ship's bridge felt more like a well-coordinated workshop than a military installation. "Incoming transmission from Confederation Command," announced Lisa Chen, the ship's communications specialist. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, filtering and processing data streams that would overwhelm most communication systems. The Krell Fleet commander's voice crackled through the speakers. Panic was evident in his gravelly tone. "We cannot mobilize in time. The colony will be lost. Recommend immediate evacuation of civilian populations." Williams said nothing for a moment. His eyes were fixed on the tactical display, watching the Dominion fleet's approach. To the untrained eye, the human response seemed impossibly calm. No frantic movements, no desperate last-minute preparations. "Tactical analysis," Williams said simply. Mark Roberts, standing at the primary analysis station, began to speak. "Dominion fleet is maintaining standard invasion formation. Predictive models show 97.3% probability of initial assault targeting the colony's primary defense grid." The HMS Defiance began to move, but it didn't move like other ships. Its movement was liquid, almost organic. Where massive alien vessels would make grand, sweeping maneuvers, the human ship seemed to slip through space like water. Aboard the other Confederation vessels, military commanders watched in a mixture of confusion and contempt. 12 ships, 12, against an armada that could obliterate entire planetary systems. The first wave of Dominion attack craft launched. Hundreds of sleek, deadly vessels surged forward, their weapon systems charging. Standard tactical doctrine would suggest defensive formations, shield reinforcement, preparing for direct confrontation. The human fleet did something entirely different, initiating adaptive response protocol, Roberts announced. His voice was calm, almost matter-of-fact. The 12 human ships didn't form a traditional battle line. Instead, they began to move in what seemed like complete chaos to the outside observer. But there was a pattern, invisible to most, but perfectly calculated. Each human ship carried an advanced AI system that processed combat scenarios faster than any organic mind could comprehend. They weren't just ships. They were living, thinking entities that could adapt to combat conditions in microseconds. The first Dominion attack wave hit and found nothing. The human ships had already anticipated every possible attack vector. Where a traditional fleet would have been decimated, these ships simply weren't where the enemy expected them to be. "Electromagnetic pulse sequence ready," Lisa Chen reported. No drama, no excitement, just pure professional efficiency. The human ships began to emit a series of precisely calibrated energy pulses. These weren't standard weapon attacks. They were something else entirely, a form of electronic warfare that seemed to confuse and disrupt the Dominion's sophisticated targeting systems. Dominion attack craft began to collide with each other. Their precise, coordinated assault dissolved into chaos. "Colony defense grid is still intact," Roberts noted. "Civilian population, 100% safe." The Krell Fleet commander's transmission came through again. This time, the panic was replaced by something else. Confusion. Disbelief. How? How did you do that?" Williams allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "We don't fight like you do," he said simply. "We fight like ourselves." As the dust settled, the 12 human ships regrouped. Not a single vessel had taken significant damage. The Dominion assault, an attack that should have decimated an entire colony, had been completely neutralized. The galaxy was about to learn that size wasn't everything. Adaptability was the true measure of strength. The Battle of Razor's Edge would become a turning point in galactic military history. A critical defensive position protecting 3 inhabited star systems, it was where the Dominion's seemingly unstoppable advance would meet its first true challenge. Intelligence reports suggested an overwhelming Dominion force, 200 primary assault vessels, supported by nearly 1,000 smaller combat craft. Against this, the human fleet remained unchanged. 12 small ships that looked more like research vessels than true warships. The Confederation's War Council was divided. Some wanted to abandon the sector, accepting massive civilian losses as an inevitable consequence. Others argued for a full-scale defensive deployment that would likely result in total destruction. Admiral Williams listened to the debates with characteristic calm. His team worked silently, their fingers moving across holographic interfaces with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. "They'll expect us to defend," Williams said quietly to his tactical officer, Mark Roberts. "So we won't." As the massive Dominion fleet approached, something strange began to happen. The 12 human ships didn't take up defensive positions. They didn't concentrate their forces. Instead, they began to spread out, a strategy that looked like complete suicide to every military strategist watching. The Krell Fleet Commander's transmission cut through the communication channels. "What are they doing?" Panic edged his voice. "They're exposing themselves completely." But exposure was the furthest thing from the truth. Each human ship carried an advanced adaptive AI system that processed combat scenarios faster than any organic mind could comprehend. They weren't just ships. They were living, thinking entities that could predict and counter enemy movements before those movements even happened. The first wave of Dominion attack craft surged forward, their weapon systems charged, targeting what seemed like vulnerable human vessels. Traditional military doctrine suggested total annihilation was moments away. Instead, something else happened entirely. The human ships began to move, but they didn't move like other ships. Their movement was liquid, almost organic. Where massive alien vessels would make grand, sweeping maneuvers, these ships slipped through space like water, anticipating, redirecting, transforming the very nature of the battlefield. Gravitational manipulation technology, something the other races had theorized but never successfully implemented, came into play. The human ships created localized gravity wells that subtly altered the trajectory of Dominion vessels. Attack formations that looked perfect on tactical displays suddenly became chaotic nightmares. Electromagnetic pulse sequence initiated, reported Lisa Chen, the communication specialist. Her voice remained calm, almost matter-of-fact. The Dominion's sophisticated targeting systems began to fail. Ships that should have been precise killing machines became confused, their coordination dissolving into random, ineffective movements. Roberts tracked the battle progression with a series of complex algorithms. "Predictive model shows Dominion fleet losing cohesion," he announced. "Estimated combat effectiveness dropping by 62% per minute." Aboard the other Confederation vessels, military commanders watched in disbelief. 12 ships, just 12, against an armada that should have obliterated entire planetary systems. The battle wasn't a traditional engagement. It was a complete reimagining of warfare itself. By the time the engagement concluded, the Dominion had lost over 80% of its attacking force. The 3 star systems remained completely intact. Civilian casualties, 0. The Krell Fleet Commander's final transmission captured the moment perfectly. "How?" he asked, just that single word filled with a mixture of confusion, respect, and total bewilderment. Williams allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "We don't fight like you do," he said simply. "We fight like ourselves." As the dust settled, the 12 human ships regrouped. Not a single vessel had taken significant damage. The Dominion's seemingly unstoppable assault had been completely neutralized. The galaxy was about to learn that innovation was the most powerful weapon of all. The captured Dominion logs arrived 3 standard weeks after the Battle of Razor's Edge. They were delivered to the Galactic Confederation's most secure research facility, a massive orbital complex that orbited a neutron star, its quantum-shielded walls designed to protect the most sensitive information in known space. Dr. Elena Rodriguez led the analysis team. Unlike the military commanders who saw warfare as a game of numbers and firepower, she approached the logs as a complex puzzle waiting to be solved. Her team consisted of specialists from various alien races, each bringing a unique perspective to the investigation. "These aren't just battle logs," Rodriguez muttered, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "These are a complete breakdown of a military philosophy." The Vorden crystal-based analyst leaned forward, his translucent formations shifting with curiosity. "Explain," he requested. Rodriguez pulled up a series of complex data streams. To most eyes, they would look like nothing more than incomprehensible patterns of light and code. But to her team, they were a window into something extraordinary. The Dominion's technological approach was built on absolute control. Every ship, every weapon system, every tactical decision was centralized, managed through a hierarchical command structure that left no room for individual adaptation. Their ships were essentially extensions of a central intelligence, precise but ultimately predictable. The human ships were different. Completely, fundamentally different. "Look at their AI systems," Rodriguez explained. Each word was carefully chosen, each gesture precise. Traditional AI follows programmed instructions. These are something else entirely. The holographic display showed a side-by-side comparison. Dominion AI moved like a rigid, hierarchical system. The human ship's AI looked more like a living ecosystem, constantly changing, adapting, learning with each microsecond of engagement. "Quantum entanglement communication," the Luminar energy-based analyst noted, "but not as we understand it." Rodriguez nodded. The human ships didn't just communicate. They existed as a collective intelligence that could reshape itself in real time. Where other species saw ships as tools, humans had created something closer to a living organism. The most shocking revelation came from the ship's nano-regenerative hull systems. Traditional spacecraft repair involved complex repair drones and extended maintenance periods. The human ships could literally reshape themselves mid-battle. A damaged section would instantly reconfigure, redistributing energy, adjusting structural integrity, becoming something new with each passing moment. "They're not just ships," Rodriguez said quietly. "They're a completely new form of technological life." The Krell representative, who had once mocked the human fleet, now listened with intense concentration. His 4 arms were completely still, a sign of deep contemplation among his species. The logs revealed something else. The human ship's eye didn't just process combat scenarios. They predicted them. They understood the psychological aspects of warfare in a way no other species had even considered. Mark Roberts, who had been part of the original design team, explained it simply. "We don't just fight. We understand." Each human ship carried an adaptive learning system that broke every known rule of artificial intelligence. They could predict enemy movements not through complex calculations, but through a form of technological intuition that bordered on the impossible. The Confederation's top military analysts spent weeks studying the logs. What they found challenged everything they understood about warfare, technology, and the very nature of intelligence itself. 12 ships had done what massive fleets could not. They had not just defended. They had completely reimagined the concept of defense. As the analysis concluded, one thing became crystal clear. Humanity had introduced something entirely new to galactic warfare. It wasn't about the size of the fleet. It was about the intelligence behind it. The galaxy would never be the same again. Psychological warfare was not something typically associated with technological strategy, but humanity had always understood that the most powerful weapon was not a gun, a ship, or even an advanced AI system. The most powerful weapon was the human mind. Admiral Williams delivered a message that would become legendary across the galaxy. It wasn't transmitted through traditional communication channels. It wasn't a grand speech or a military declaration. Instead, it was a carefully constructed series of communications that began to create microscopic fractures within the Dominion's seemingly monolithic empire. The transmission was simple. Size is a limitation. Imagination is the true weapon. At first, the message seemed nonsensical to the alien races. But as it spread through encrypted channels, through diplomatic back channels, through the subtle networks of communication that existed between star systems, something extraordinary began to happen. The Dominion's internal communication network started to show signs of stress. Their centralized command structure, once considered their greatest strength, became their most significant weakness. Mark Roberts and Lisa Chen worked tirelessly, not on traditional military strategies, but on something far more complex. They began to understand the Dominion not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a complex system to be understood. It's about breaking their fundamental understanding of conflict, Roberts explained to the Confederation's strategy team. They believe in absolute control, but absolute control is also absolute vulnerability. The human approach was unlike anything the galactic civilizations had ever seen. Where other species saw warfare as a physical confrontation, humans saw it as a complex psychological challenge. The Dominion's communication systems began to show microscopic irregularities. Messages that should have been instantaneous began to slow. Tactical coordination that was once perfect became slightly, just slightly, imperfect. No weapons had been fired. No direct assault had been launched. Yet the Dominion's internal structures were beginning to crumble from within. The Vorden crystal-based analysts were the first to notice. Their sophisticated communication monitoring systems detected something unprecedented. The Dominion wasn't just losing military effectiveness. They were losing confidence. How are they doing this? The Vorden lead analyst asked, his crystalline formations shifting with confusion and growing respect. Dr. Elena Rodriguez explained it simply. Warfare isn't about destroying an enemy. It's about understanding them so completely that destruction becomes unnecessary. The human team had mapped the Dominion's communication networks with a precision that bordered on the impossible. They weren't just intercepting messages. They were understanding the psychological patterns that drove those messages. Each transmission was a carefully crafted piece of a larger puzzle. Subtle nudges, microscopic interventions, the kind of psychological manipulation that would be impossible for a traditional military force to comprehend. The Krell military commanders watched in disbelief. Their entire understanding of conflict was being rewritten in real time. Warfare wasn't about massive fleets or overwhelming firepower. It was about understanding, truly understanding, the enemy. We're not fighting their war, Williams had said earlier. We're changing the very nature of how war is understood. As the Dominion's internal communication networks began to show signs of stress, something extraordinary happened. The empire that had seemed unstoppable began to show cracks. Not massive, explosive fractures, but tiny, microscopic vulnerabilities that would grow with time. The 12 ships that had once been a source of ridicule were now the most feared vessels in the galaxy. Not because of their weapons, not because of their technology, but because of the minds that control them. Imagination, Williams would later say, is the most powerful weapon in the universe. The galaxy was about to learn that true strength was never about size. It was about understanding, about adaptability, about seeing the world and conflict in a way no one else could imagine. The aftermath of the Dominion conflict would be remembered as a turning point in galactic history. 12 small ships had done what entire fleets could not. They had fundamentally transformed the understanding of warfare, technology, and interstellar conflict. In the central hall of the Galactic Confederation, a new era was about to begin. Representatives from dozens of starfaring civilizations gathered, their eyes fixed on the human delegation. Where once there had been mockery, now there was only respect. Admiral Jack Williams stood at the center of the room, calm and composed as always. Behind him, the 12 ships that had changed everything were projected as a holographic display, no longer looking small or insignificant, but representing something far more profound. "We are not here to conquer," Williams began, his voice clear and measured. "We are here to demonstrate that true strength comes from understanding, not from size." The Vorden crystal-based representative was the first to speak. Where once their communication had been dismissive, now it carried a tone of genuine curiosity. How? The question hung in the air, simple, yet loaded with years of accumulated doubt and newfound respect. Mark Roberts stepped forward. His presentation was unlike any military briefing in galactic history. Instead of complex weapon schematics or tactical diagrams, he showed something else entirely: the core philosophy behind the human approach. "Warfare is not about destruction," Roberts explained. "It's about communication, about understanding, about solving problems in ways no one else has considered." The holographic displays began to show the detailed analysis of their encounters. Each engagement was broken down not in terms of ships destroyed or territory conquered, but in terms of problems solved and conflicts prevented. The Krell military commanders, who had once laughed at the human fleet, now listened with intense concentration. Their forearms remained perfectly still, a sign of deep respect among their species. Dr. Elena Rodriguez presented the technological insights. The human ships were more than just vessels. They were living systems that could adapt, learn, and grow in real time. Their eye was not a tool, but a form of intelligence that approached problem-solving with a creativity that defied traditional understanding. "We don't see technology as a weapon," Rodriguez said. "We see it as a solution." The most surprising revelation came from the diplomatic implications. The human fleet had not just defeated the Dominion. They had fundamentally changed how the galaxy understood conflict resolution. Diplomatic channels that had been frozen for generations began to show signs of movement. The Dominion's internal structures, once considered unbreakable, had been transformed by a dozen ships that understood the power of communication better than massive military forces. "Size is a limitation." Williams repeated the phrase that had become legendary. "Imagination is the true weapon." As the conference continued, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The 12 ships represented more than a military victory. They represented a completely new approach to interstellar relations. The Luminar energy-based delegates, beings of pure intellectual energy, were particularly moved. They understood, perhaps better than any other species, that true intelligence was about adaptation, not domination. "We have been looking at conflict all wrong," the Luminar lead representative announced. "Humanity has shown us that strength is not about power. It's about understanding." In the years that followed, the 12 ships would become more than a military legend. They would become a symbol of a new way of thinking, a reminder that innovation, adaptability, and imagination were the most powerful forces in the universe. Admiral Williams, standing before the assembled representatives, allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The fleet that had once been mocked was now changing the galaxy. As the holographic display of the 12 ships continued to rotate, it was clear that everything had changed. The galaxy would never be the same again.